You're listening to Aged Care Uncovered, shining a spotlight onto the Australian aged care sector, giving our older Australians and their families insight and a voice. Today's episode is sponsored by Aged Care Ready, assisting elderly clients and their families navigate the aged care sector. Now here's your host, Naomi Anderson.
Hello again, my name is Naomi Anderson. Thank you so much for joining us again for another episode of Aged Care Uncovered. And again today I am joined by our amazing co-host, Kaitlyn Cook. Welcome, Kaitlyn.
Thank you. Thanks for having me today.
So in the last couple of episodes we have been talking about what support is available out there for your elderly loved ones. Today what we're actually talking about is facility tours. Now we conduct facility tours very, very regularly and very frequently, and we have both worked in the aged care sector for a very long time, so we know this area like the back of our hands. This is our specialty, would you say?
Yes, we know exactly what to look for when touring a facility.
Yeah, and I guess when you're having to go through this and looking for a facility for whether it's mum or dad or a grandparent, it's a very overwhelming process, and you're very emotional and vulnerable at the time. So these will be really our top tips of things that you should be looking for. Yeah. When you're going through this.
Yeah.
Do you want to kick it off with your first top tip? Maybe start at the very beginning.
Yeah. So you've decided that your elderly loved one needs to go into care. What next? You ring around the facilities and you ask to take a tour, but what are you actually looking for on that tour? So the first thing we look at before we even enter the facility is the demographic and the facilities. Is it in close location to the people that need to visit, and do they provide the facilities needed to care for your elderly loved one?
So what we mean by that is we do some background research before we even step foot in that facility. So things like previous audits or notices of non-compliance, any public reviews that are available, any historical business data like changes of names and things like that, and where there has been any, standards not met, that will give you a really good idea of how that facility is managed before you even step foot in that facility. Now, from experience, and I guess you would agree with me here, Kaitlyn, is that as soon as you step foot in that facility, it's a sales process, right? Yeah. So with that in mind, what are some of the key takeaways to look for when you're taking a tour?
A really good one to look out for is, what do the other residents look like? Do they look happy and well cared for? Are they clean? Are they engaged in the activities? Is there any forms of restraint, chemical or physical restraints? Or are they kind of just sitting there checked out, not really engaged in what's going on, and they don't look happy?
I think also when you are looking at the other residents, to have a look, is your elderly loved one actually going to fit in? So yes. Are they the same demographic? Are they at a similar cognition level? Because there's no point in looking at a facility where you're surrounded by dementia residents when your elderly loved one still has cognitive capacity, because that could be really detrimental to their mental health. And also when you're looking at the demographic of the other residents there, it's really important to take into account what types of care needs they look like they would have. So on a really basic high level, what we would be saying here is, are they in lounge chairs, for example? Are they mobile? Are they wheeling themselves around in wheelchairs? do they look like Kaitlyn said? Are they engaging with the people around them, or are they dozing kind of thing? Because what you want to really have a look at here is if they have a high level of care, you want to be looking at how many staff they have on the floor, okay? Because there's no point in going into a facility and you're walking into a wing of 30 people that all seem to be really high care, but then you can only see 2 or 3 staff members. That would be a red flag for me.
Yes, definitely. That means they're not providing enough staff to care for your elderly loved ones.
Yeah. And although technically at the moment there are no such things as ratios in aged care, you should still be asking what their ratios are, because the facilities that actually care will have set targets and set ratios.
Yeah, just to make sure there's enough staff to cover that care needs.
Yeah. So when taking these tours, you're looking beyond just the physical environment to make sure that it looks clean and there's no obvious odours and that it looks maintained. What are some other things you'd be looking at during a tour, Kaitlyn?
Infection control is a big one.
Huge.
So is there linen skips littering the hall? Are staff carrying dirty linen down the hall as well? Especially with the COVID climate emerging in Australia, this has really been highlighted. So what's their policies and procedures for an outbreak? How have they managed previous outbreaks in the past?
And even their
screening?
check-in, their check-in procedures when you even enter the facility. Are they rapid testing you? Are they taking your temperature? Are they signing you in? Are they asking you to use hand sanitizer when you enter the facility? Do you have to change your mask? Do you have to wear an N95 or a P92? Or do they ask you to put a shield on? So that may seem cumbersome, but it really demonstrates on how well they're managing that current situation.
Yeah, and that will impact how they keep your loved ones safe in that environment too.
Yeah, absolutely. Another thing that we look at is catering. So do they cater on site? Does the food look fresh and appetizing, or does it look like it's just been brought from the shop? Some facilities that we go to look like they've just served tinned food, which is not very appropriate, especially, when you have to consider individual dietary needs and nutritional needs as well.
Yeah.
What's something else that we could be looking at?
The choices with that menu as well, like as a part of the new consumer directed standards, they've got to have a certain amount of choice. And let's face it, you don't want to eat the same thing for dinner each day. You want to be able to have that option because not everyone likes the same things.
I will add something there as well, because we have seen some facilities do the sneaky and charge extra service fees for a second option at dinner when that should actually be standard.
Yes.
So be very wary of that and ask what their extra services fees are and what they include.
And they're not compulsory, those extra services fees too.
Yeah, they're completely negotiable, as is the RAD, or the large lump sum that is needing to be paid. But we can probably dive into that on another session.
That's a whole nother episode.
Yeah, we could talk a lot about that. Lifestyle and leisure programs, making sure that they are all individualised and determined by the residents and what their personal preferences are, not just herd activities. Do you want to explain what herd activities are?
Yeah, so it's kind of like herding a group of people into a room and then doing the activity but not actually engaging each person in that activity, just having them kind of present, or even if they're not, they don't look that present.
They're physically present, yeah. And I guess how that would be demonstrated when you're looking at this sort of thing, and how we have seen it, is literally just people lined up in chairs facing the person at the front taking the activity, and pretty much just entertaining them rather than engaging them.
Yeah, there's a big difference there.
Yeah, so ask to see the lifestyle and leisure plan or calendar that they've got out and take that home with you and review that.
Yeah, and make sure there's activities on there that your elderly loved one will enjoy to do as well.
That is so important for their mental health, especially in this current climate.
Yeah.
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 Resources, and what we mean by that is that could be anything from the way that the facility educates their staff or provides education options, through to the equipment that they have available.
Yeah.
As well.
That ongoing staff training is really important too, to keep everyone on the same page and providing that top level of care.
Now, when you come to the end of the tour, more often than not, the person leading the tour will put you into a side room and start interviewing you, or that's how it feels, I guess, sometimes, about your elderly loved one. Rapid firing questions, and the reason behind this is because they want to have a better understanding of who your loved one is and whether or not they'll accept them. And do you want to explain the individual care needs and the ACFI funding and why they would be doing that before you even consider applying?
Yes. So the higher level of care that your elderly loved one needs, the more funding the facility gets from the government for that person. So if they have more residents with the higher needs care, the more funding they're going to get. And they obviously want the more funding.
Yeah, so they generally, not always, but generally will choose, if they're having to choose between two applicants and they only have one room available, they will generally choose the person that could provide more funding to them. Now, the funding is quite substantial for somebody who's high level care, and that may not be, mum or dad or your elderly loved one when they come in, but it could be progressed to that as their needs increase. But the facility could receive upwards of $220 per day, and that's in the current ACFI funding model, and that's going to change in the next few months. But that money is supposed to go towards staffing. So again, it's coming back to the ratios of staff based on the individual care needs of each residence as well. So that's why they're grilling you essentially, or interviewing you to see what their care needs are, to see if they would be a viable option as a resident.
Yeah, they might also put the hard sales pitch on you at this point too, trying to pressure you into purchasing that room.
Yeah.
Basically.
And you should never ever make a decision on the spot. Take all the information that you need and go home, talk about it and have a think about it. Don't ever be pressured, because more often than not, unfortunately to say, that those are sales tactics and it's not the entire true story behind the wait lists.
And if possible too, if your elderly loved one has cognitive capacity, involve them in that decision. Like, that's going to be their home for the future. Have them as involved in that decision as possible so they can feel empowered and keep some kind of independence there as well.
Yeah.
In that choice.
Absolutely. Thank you again for joining us today. Feel free to visit our other channels, whether that's YouTube, our podcast, Facebook page, or LinkedIn page. Or if you are going through this journey with an elderly loved one at the moment and would like the community support of other people who are also going through something similar, head on over to our Facebook group, the Aging Parents Support Group. We will see you next time. Bye.
Bye for now.
Thanks for listening to Aged Care Uncovered. If you enjoyed today's episode, head on over to your favourite podcast streaming app and give it 5 stars. If you have any questions about today's episode or about aged care in general, please contact us.